In every serious baseball card collection, there are cards whose value transcends their monetary worth. Value that goes well beyond any price guide or assessed grade. Cards that ceremoniously take a collector back to their youth and brings with them a sense of nostalgia and of how things used to be. In my collection, there are many, and each of them has a story to tell.
All right, here's the deal. Okay, I'll give you my Marrow Shell and the Tiant for your McCovey and...
No. McCovey's off the table.
Oh, come on, Paul, be reasonable.
I am being reasonable. McCovey is off the table. Unless you're willing to think about your Williams.
Oh, you can't be serious. Willie McCovey for Ted Williams? That's an insult.
My first cards came a pack at a time, followed by trades with friends and classmates. Money never exchanged hands in the middle school card market, but nearly anything of value was used in the transfer of goods from one 11-year-old to the next. On Meatloaf Day, even half of a peanut butter and jelly sandwich could turn into something cool. Condition was hardly a concern, and in the late 70s, our only price guides were the players we idolized and the teams we followed. I had off-the-table players to include, of course, Hank Aaron. For that matter, any Braves, even the Commons. Doug treasured his Montreal Expos, specifically Gary Carter and Andre Dawson. Robbie didn't have any particular team or player, but did chase stars of the era to include George Brett, Dave Winfield, Rod Carew, Tom Seaver, Reggie Jackson, and Johnny Bench. And he always had cards I had never seen before. There's one in particular I will never forget. A 1967 Roberto Clemente. I knew who Clemente was through my dad's sporting news. I knew he was a perennial all-star, 12-time Gold Glove winner, 1966 National League MVP, a 4-time batting champion, and after an absolute historic performance, named the World Series MVP in 1971. I knew he was in the Hall of Fame and a true legend who finished his career with exactly 3,000 hits. I also knew he died in a plane crash trying to help others. That 1967 Topps card was the first Roberto Clemente I had ever seen. It stopped me dead in my tracks. Robbie was an interesting kid. He had an international flair about him in a rural Air Force Base suburban setting. He also had the best of everything and maintained a level of sophistication about himself. If the movie American Pie had been portrayed in middle school instead of high school, Robbie could have easily played the part of Finch. He had a younger sister, but seemed to have the perks of an only child. He had the largest bedroom in the house and the only one with its own bathroom. He always had the latest and coolest toys. Handheld electronic games were just becoming popular. We both had a Coleco electronic quarterback. Mine was a single player, his head-to-head. We both collected mini NFL pennants and helmets. Not the variety we have today, but the kind you got out of a 25-cent vending machine at the entrance of the grocery store. I only had a few. He had the complete set, neatly displayed in his room, helmets on a shelf, pennants pinned to the wall, all arranged by conference and division. We were both into marbles, and while he had moved heavily into Star Wars, I still enjoyed Evel Knievel. I loved that stunt cycle and scramble van. I still do. I'm not sure if Robbie knew what he had in that 67 Clemente, but he knew I wanted it. And much like Kevin and Paul, we bartered back and forth on players, but could never reach an agreement. There really wasn't much in my stack of predominantly 78 and 79 Topps that Robbie needed or wanted. Though I didn't normally include any Braves players, I'm certain I tried to throw in a Biff Pacaroba, but never a Del Murphy or Bob Horner. Looking back, it wouldn't have mattered. In addition to trading cards and lunch items, we also flipped cards and shot marbles. Our cards carried those battle scars. Many of them had tipped corners and dirt stains that captured their kiss with the ground after having flipped a minimum of 3 times in the air. The marble ring doubled as the flipping arena after a shootout. It offered a clear spot to land the cards, and if your card landed face up on top of any other cards inside the ring, they were yours. I won many cards flipping, but never that Clemente, even though Robbie would occasionally use it. I always seemed to just come up short. In a prelude to the Zion case, I carried my cards, marbles, and lunch in a metal Monday Night Football lunchbox. Always ready to trade, flip, shoot, or eat on a moment's notice. I'd casually throw out possible trades, but he'd graciously decline. He was always very polite and proper, a reflection of his German grandmother and mother. Every now and then he'd throw out an offer, but it always included off-the-table cards. These were my first true lessons in negotiation. Things remained at a stalemate for a couple of months. Luckily, though, no one seemed interested in that Clemente. A breakthrough occurred one day after school while stopping by Robbie's house prior to a neighborhood football game. I always enjoyed seeing all the cool stuff he had and how it was displayed in his room. In particular, he had a great Star Wars collection with literally every figure to go with a large-sized TIE Fighter, X-Wing Fighter, Millennium Falcon, and Death Star. All displayed in fighting formation. It was truly impressive. There was, however, something missing. A C-3PO figure. I asked where it was and he said he didn't have one yet. This was my opening. I think it was a Wednesday and we had been planning a sleepover at his house for Friday. I thought if I could get a C-3PO figure by then, I might just have a chance at that Clemente card. I scrounged up every penny I could, pulling together what money I had left over from a summer of mowing yards. With 4 kids in the house, Mom and Dad did not give an allowance. And gifts and similar purchases, those were reserved for birthdays and Christmas. I don't remember how much that C-3PO figure cost, but I had just enough money to get one at the base exchange. This was going to be better than Meatloaf Day. That Friday, I had to play it cool, though I wanted to jump straight into negotiations. I had packed the still in the box C-3PO in my bag, ready to showcase it at just the right moment. We had a blast that night. We relived all the great plays during the after-school football game, went to the youth center dance, played all the after-dark neighborhood games, hung out with the other kids, and ultimately ended up back at his house, exhausted and exhilarated. We played some electronic games and finally crashed for the night, never once talking about or looking at baseball cards. The next morning, he had some places to be with his family, so I grabbed a quick bowl of cereal and headed home. But before I left, I properly placed C-3PO on the shelf with his other figures and a note thanking him for having me over and being such a great friend. I wasn't expecting how good it actually made me feel. I'd never felt anything like that before. Mom was right. It was better to give than to receive. I rode my bike home literally floating on air, popping wheelies, jumping curbs, and just feeling really good about the whole night and the awesome time we'd had. Being a kid back then was so much fun. As I came in the door, Mom was making breakfast. The smell of her cooking remains one of my absolute favorite memories. She asked how I'd like my eggs, and I said I had already had breakfast at Robbie's, kissed her on the cheek, and went to my room. As I was putting my stuff away, I noticed an envelope in my lunchbox. It was the thank you note from Robbie. Simple and to the point. Thanks for being my friend, Robbie. Inside the envelope was that 1967 Roberto Clemente. I was stunned. I just stood there for a minute, not knowing what to think or do. I had my very first Roberto Clemente card. Let that soak in. My very first Roberto Clemente card. I still get chills thinking about it. You'd think I'd run through the house hooping and hollering. Instead, I quietly placed the card back in the envelope where it remained for the better part of the next decade. We never really talked about the exchange and just went on being typical 11-year-olds. But we both knew. That Clemente became a prominent card in my collection, always protected and preserved. And C-3PO, at least for a short while, shined bright with the rest of his Star Wars figures. Giving is indeed its own reward. Not long after making the exchange, we moved, as military families always do. I lost touch with Robbie and haven't heard from him since. Staying connected back in those days was pretty much isolated to the U.S. Postal Service and really expensive long-distance phone calls. Even though a postage stamp was less than a quarter, the promise to stay in touch ended after only a letter or two. The pressures of growing up pushed us to look forward and move on to the next adventure. And we did. The thing is, the dirt in the past never leaves you. It relentlessly lays a trail of memories and guides you into tomorrow. This card is certainly desirable because it's a Roberto Clemente, but its true value lies in the fact it came from Robbie. SGC graded it a 4. Its dirt drives it to a gem mint 10. Population? 1.